I'll be the first to admit that I dismissed Rolex and Tudor's releases this year. I grouped them into a bunch and called them lackluster, and I think in hindsight, putting Tudor under that same bus was a bit wrong, because not only did they deliver on a certain model that we've been asking for, but they gave us another piece that was quite interesting, one that I looked at the least, the Black Bay 41. The monochrome, I don't know what they're calling this watch. Nevertheless, it has received the unofficial nickname of, if you saw the cover photo of the video, I'm sure many of us are rolling our eyes and saying, yeah, it's just another Black Bay. I mean, what else is new? But actually, when we think about it and we think about the context surrounding this watch, the watch enthusiasts out there, they might have a point. I should start by saying that this video will be quite unstructured. I try to put down my thoughts, musings, my ramblings into a cohesive narrative from A to B, but it was very difficult this time around. Maybe it's just the fact that I'm getting old. Maybe it's because the subject is so simple that I struggled to find something original to really talk about. Anyway, where a lot of us, I will venture to say most of us, were more excited to see the launch of the Black Bay 58 GMT. Maybe I'm just talking from personal preference here because I've wanted to see this watch for years, been predicting about it for years. To finally see it materialize was great. While this was all happening, there was in fact an underground movement going on behind the scenes. Enthusiasts were calling this year's black or monochrome Black Bay 41 a revitalized Tudor Submariner. See, the first thing that came to my mind when I saw this piece was it's obviously just last year's burgundy bezel variant, now without a gilt dial. And I mean, when you say it like that, it sounds like a downgrade. There's a negative perception surrounding it. Because, in my mind at least, getting rid of the gilt dial is getting rid of a unique, exciting feature that made this watch different. And like I showed in the previous video, I'll show again in this. It's how this was achieved by the creatives, or the board of executives. You take the burgundy bezel model, you dump the saturation to 0%, and you bump the contrast to 30%. And it's that simple. Doesn't sound like I'm promoting this piece very well, right? But why is it that people seem to be going mad for it? And I think deep down, it's the lack of color, it's the lack of flair that so many people have been waiting for. And it just hit me the other day. In fact, I think this was the inspiration for the video. When was the last time that Tudor gave us a Black Bay? That's not a gilt dial, with no different color lettering, with no red accents, green accents, blue. It's been a long time, right? It's way longer than I can remember. I think they've spent all of this time focusing on everything else under the sun. The Pelagos line, the many variations, the Ranger, the chronographs. They've in fact left this particular model for last. The closest we've had in the past would be an example like the Black Bay Pro, which also used color accents. Or we could look over to the Pelagos, the FXD, the 39mm, all of which use red as a line of text. Even more recently with the Black Bay 54. It's black, but has gilt elements on its dial. In fact, I could be wrong here, but this is the first time since the original debut of the Black Bay, with the smiling dial, that we have seen a monotone variant of this piece without any color included. So in keeping with tradition of last year's burgundy bezel variants, the one watch that has been lacking in their newest range also seems to be the simplest of them all. And the one thing that we often tend to overlook is that simplicity wins the day. When all is said and done, most of us are after that one piece that ticks the boxes for size, wearability, and versatility. That's it. And for a lot of us in this hobby, I think we can admit, we go through our whole lives trying to find that watch that does the job. No question, for the prices you're paying now, it's very difficult to find watches with this level of build quality and tolerances especially. Even if we go so high to a brand like Grand Seiko, where the dials are incredible, the movements are simply terrific, but the bracelet department, you have to start deducting points. Similar to a brand like Longines, who's trying to push up in this sort of category, but once again, bracelet department seems to always lose a few points. Tudor has found that niche, and at least they've worked their way up to this niche, where they now compete with the likes of Omega with movement ratings, but they charge a far more attainable price all the same. And it's a difficult thing that I would say a majority of brands are still struggling to achieve today. To find an identity, to reinforce that this is your brand's direction, while at the same time compete with names that are offering more for less. Finding that sweet spot between price, size, design, and aesthetics that satisfy a wide customer base. Look at a video I made last week about Zenith and their entirely new Defy dive watch range. I like them because they're interesting, they're kind of head scratching, the history around them is great, but you'll also realize that they're not everyone's cup of tea. The designs are just so far out there that most folks, they simply aren't interested. And then we circle back to what Tudor offers in comparison. I mean, my personal favorite is still the FXD. I think it's such a brilliant watch. I need to do a follow-up video on it. It's not spoken about enough how the profile of this watch is absolutely perfect. But of course the Black Bay, for the majority, has become that sweet spot watch. I think it's in the name. It's in the mass appeal it's gained over the last decade. You know, whether it's a GMT or a standard time only, it epitomizes the ideal go anywhere, do anything aesthetic, and it appeals to a lot of people. We're circling back to the monotone colors now. We see how unstructured this video is. Speaking from personal experience again, it took me 10 years of denying it before landing a Rolex Explorer in the collection. It's genuinely the plainest, the most boring watch of said small collection. You know what happens? You put it on and you don't even think about it. Sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes it's just the right watch for when you need it to be. A watch that does not require your concern, but also does everything you would ever need it to do at the same time. We think about how the Submariner for decades has been that go-to choice for so many. And even today, we can't knock it. There's just something. There's that X factor about it that manages to do so much with so little. And here with this Tudor, we have that all in one package when we start breaking it apart and looking at all of the pieces individually. A 41mm size that's wide-reaching and wearable for a lot of wrist sizes. A 5-link bracelet with a T-Fit micro-adjust system. When we compare this watch now to what it looked like 10, 12 years ago, and how a lot of it looks the same, absolutely, but actually when you look at it under a microscope, everything has changed, from the case profile to the overall thickness to the tolerances. To look at the design of this watch now and see how they've cleaned up the dial so nicely. Yes, it would be amazing to see a rose logo return, a smiling self-winding on the dial, but these two lines of text, don't they give the watch a level of assuredness at this stage? And I've also found it interesting how they've never designated the Black Bay name on these dials. I think they did for one variant, the ceramic model, if I remember right. We've been discussing all the positives of this watch. Naturally, it doesn't get everything right. Its thickness could still be brought down, and that's always going to be a gripe amongst all of us enthusiasts. Its 41mm diameter doesn't suit the smaller wrists. 39mm is far more favorable. But then again, these are different weight classes, these are different sizes. But for the most part, the typical bystander to see this watch, they would look at it from a distance, they would recognize it as a Submariner. To them, it's as good as a sub, and also has the bonus of a 5-link bracelet, which makes it even cooler. A watch like this indicates to me that Tudor has found their stride with the Black Bay collection. That they're in fact embracing the simplicity instead of bolstering themselves with the use of gilt accents and many other spot colors and highlights. And returning back to that question, is this Tudor's answer to the Rolex Submariner? I'll leave you with this. If we were new to this hobby and we had no idea what these watches were, where they originated from, anything about their history, would we not call this piece a Tudor Submariner? Food for thought. It's quite mind-blowing to say that we haven't seen a white on black dial Black Bay Diver for a long time. Is this in fact the watch that we should be paying more attention to compared to the Black Bay 58 GMT? Thank you for taking the time to watch this insanely disjointed video. See you in the next one.